What would drive a mother to break her silence in the face of public judgment and unimaginable tragedy? For Kathleen Mangione, the mother of Luigi Mangione, a man accused of a shocking crime that gripped the nation, her voice has become the key to understanding the complexities behind a story that has captivated millions. Once a figure of quiet dignity, Kathleen's journey from silence to advocacy is as compelling as it is heartbreaking. Why did she decide to speak out now? And what does her story reveal about the pressures of privilege and the failings of a system meant to protect us? Can a family torn apart by scandal find a way to heal? Let's uncover the answers. The streets of Manhattan were abuzz with their usual frenetic energy that December evening. People moved briskly along the bustling sidewalks, the chill in the air making their breath visible as it mingled with the city lights. Yet, amidst the holiday cheer and the anticipation of festivities, an event unfolded that sent shockwaves far beyond the city's limits. A gunshot rang out, disrupting the hum of activity near the Hilton Midtown. The victim was Brian Thompson, a name synonymous with corporate power and influence as the CEO of United Healthcare. As news spread, the city's collective heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the audacity of the act, broad daylight, steps from one of the city's most iconic hotels, that shocked the public. It was the unfolding mystery of the shooter, an unknown figure at the time who seemed to vanish into thin air. The media pounced on the story, dissecting every detail and speculating wildly about motives, suspects, and what this meant for corporate America. For days, headlines dominated television screens, newspapers, and social media feeds. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a moment that demanded answers. The city's law enforcement and federal agents worked tirelessly, piecing together fragmented clues from eyewitness accounts and surveillance footage. 6 days later, the search came to an unexpected end in Altoona, Pennsylvania, a far cry from the glamour of Manhattan. In a quiet McDonald's, customers were startled by a swarm of agents arresting a man who had been sitting alone with a coffee and a book. That man was Luigi Mangione. A name that until then had meant little to the public now became the epicenter of one of the year's most sensational cases. As news of his arrest spread, curiosity about Luigi grew. Who was this man, and what had driven him to commit such a heinous act? The answers were anything but straightforward. Luigi was no stranger to privilege. He came from a family whose roots in Baltimore ran deep in business, philanthropy, and community respect. His grandfather, Nicholas Mangione Sr., was a self-made man who built a real estate empire from the ground up. Luigi's father, Louis, carried on the family's legacy through Lorien Health Services, while his mother, Kathleen, was a poised figure known for her elegance and discretion. The arrest was not just a blow to Luigi's personal image, it shook the foundation of the Mangione family itself. Their guarded privacy, a hallmark of their lives, was suddenly torn apart. Reporters camped outside their properties, cameras trained on every movement, hoping for a glimpse of the family's reaction. Friends and acquaintances, long familiar with the Mangiones' polished image, found themselves questioning what could have gone wrong. How could a family of such stability and prominence find itself at the heart of a national controversy? Kathleen Mangione, Luigi's mother, became a particular point of focus. Known for her composed demeanor, she was often described as the glue holding the family together. For weeks following Luigi's arrest, she remained silent, a stark contrast to the media frenzy surrounding her son's case. Behind closed doors, however, Kathleen was anything but idle. Her life had already been upended in ways the public couldn't imagine. Months earlier, Luigi had disappeared, cutting off contact with his family entirely. For Kathleen, this was the beginning of a long and painful search. The summer of 2024 had been a season of growing desperation. Luigi's absence left a void that his mother couldn't ignore. She had spent countless hours trying to reach him, her calls going unanswered, her messages unreturned. Friends and family tried to console her, offering words of encouragement that did little to ease her fears. Kathleen, however, was a woman of action. Refusing to sit idly by, she reached out to law enforcement, expressing concerns about her son's well-being and state of mind. The chilling details she shared with the FBI painted a picture of a man spiraling into isolation and resentment, consumed by struggles that few outside the family understood. Her decision to involve the authorities was not an easy one. For a mother, acknowledging that her child might pose a danger to himself or others is a profound and painful admission. Yet Kathleen felt she had no choice. She spoke candidly about Luigi's struggles with chronic back pain, his growing disillusionment with the healthcare system, and the anger that seemed to fester in his social media posts. She hoped that by sharing these insights, she might help prevent the unthinkable. What she didn't anticipate was how those very warnings would become part of the narrative after Luigi's arrest. By the time the media caught wind of Kathleen's role in alerting law enforcement, the public's fascination with the case had reached fever pitch. Speculation about Luigi's motives dominated headlines, with pundits and commentators dissecting every detail of his manifesto, a document that shed light on his grievances against corporate greed and systemic failures. For many, Luigi became a symbol of the frustrations and inequalities that plagued society. But for Kathleen, he was still her son, a man who had once been full of promise, but had somehow lost his way. In those early weeks, Kathleen's silence spoke volumes. To some, it was a sign of complicity, a refusal to confront the reality of her son's actions. To others, it was a mother's attempt to shield her family from further scrutiny. For Kathleen, however, the silence was a necessity. She was not yet ready to speak, not until she fully understood how to reconcile her love for Luigi with the horror of what he had done. This silence, though heavy, was not infinite. Kathleen's breaking point was coming, a moment when she would step into the spotlight and offer her side of the story. For now, the world watched and waited, their curiosity tinged with judgment, their fascination growing with each passing day. Kathleen Mangione had always been a woman of quiet resolve, known for her ability to navigate life's challenges with dignity. But as the days turned into weeks following Luigi's arrest, her world felt increasingly like a whirlwind she couldn't control. The once private life she had cherished was gone, replaced by a ceaseless media circus. Journalists camped outside the family's Maryland estate, their lenses capturing every fleeting glimpse of the Mangione. Rumors swirled, and each day seemed to bring a new headline, dissecting not only Luigi's life but the family's history as well. For Kathleen, the silence she had maintained so far was both a shield and a burden. The summer months leading up to Luigi's arrest had been among the hardest of Kathleen's life. When Luigi first cut off contact with the family in July, she had been concerned but not alarmed. He had always been somewhat of a loner, introspective and prone to retreating into his own world when overwhelmed. But as the weeks stretched on without so much as a text or call, her unease grew. By September, she was making daily attempts to reach him, her messages ranging from casual check-ins to outright pleas for a response. Each unanswered call deepened her worry. Friends and relatives urged her to stay calm, suggesting that Luigi might simply need space to sort through his struggles. But Kathleen's instincts told her something was deeply wrong. Luigi's back pain had become a constant in his life, and she knew how much it weighed on him, both physically and emotionally. The surgery he underwent in 2023 was supposed to be a turning point, yet it had only brought more pain and frustration. His social media posts, sparse as they were, revealed his growing disillusionment, not just with his circumstances, but with the world at large. There were rants about corporate greed, inequality, and the failings of the healthcare system. To an outsider, they might have seemed like typical frustrations. To Kathleen, they were red flags. By late October, Kathleen's concern turned to desperation. She reached out to law enforcement, filing a missing persons report with the hope that someone, somewhere, might be able to help. It was a difficult step for her to take. Admitting that she couldn't find or reach her own son felt like a failure as a mother, but she couldn't ignore the gnawing fear that Luigi might be in danger, or worse, might pose a danger to others. Her conversations with the FBI were frank and emotional. She described Luigi as a brilliant but troubled individual, someone who had always carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. She shared her fears that his isolation, pain, and growing anger could lead him down a dark path. It was during these discussions that Kathleen made a chilling admission. She could envision Luigi doing something drastic. The words left her lips reluctantly, but she knew they needed to be said. As a mother, it was one of the hardest truths she had ever faced. She loved her son deeply, but she also understood the depth of his struggles in a way few others could. Her hope was that by sharing these insights, she might prevent a tragedy. What she didn't know was that her fears would soon be realized in ways she could never have imagined. When Luigi was arrested in early December, Kathleen's initial reaction was a mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief that he was alive and no longer a danger to himself or others. Heartbreak at the reality of what he had done and the devastation it had caused. The family's statement, issued through a spokesperson, was brief but heartfelt, expressing their shock and devastation while offering prayers for Brian Thompson's family. It was the first time the Mangiones had addressed the public directly, yet it did little to stem the tide of speculation and judgment that followed. Kathleen found herself grappling with emotions that felt impossible to reconcile. On one hand, she was the mother of a man accused of an unthinkable crime, a reality that carried its own weight of guilt and shame. On the other hand, she was still Luigi's mother, a role that demanded unconditional love and support. Balancing these two realities was an exhausting, often isolating experience. The public, eager for answers, began to project their own narratives onto her silence. Was she in denial about Luigi's actions? Was she complicit in some way? Or was she simply a grieving mother, trying to protect her family in the only way she knew how? As the weeks went on, Kathleen's silence became a source of frustration for the media and a point of curiosity for the public. But within the walls of the Mangione home, that silence was anything but passive. Kathleen spent countless hours reviewing every detail of Luigi's life, searching for clues, for signs she might have missed. She pored over his old school projects, journals, and even the sparse entries on his social media accounts. Each piece of information felt like a puzzle fragment, one she desperately hoped would help her understand how things had come to this. One memory stood out to her, a moment from Luigi's teenage years when he had confided in her about feeling overwhelmed by the expectations placed upon him. "Sometimes it feels like there's no room to just be myself," he had said, his voice tinged with frustration and sadness. At the time, Kathleen had tried to reassure him, reminding him of his strengths and the support of their family. But now, in hindsight, she wondered if she had truly understood the depth of his feelings. Had she done enough to help him navigate those pressures? Or had her efforts to shield him inadvertently pushed him further into isolation? These questions haunted her, keeping her awake at night as she replayed conversations and moments from Luigi's life in her mind. She couldn't escape the sense of responsibility she felt, not just for what had happened, but for the narrative that was now unfolding in the public eye. The media's portrayal of Luigi as a troubled loner weighed heavily on her. While there was some truth to the description, it also felt incomplete. Luigi was more than his struggles, more than the mistakes he had made. He was her son, a man with dreams, talents, and a capacity for kindness that the world now seemed determined to overlook. As Christmas approached, Kathleen felt the strain of the season more acutely than ever. The holiday, once a time of joy and togetherness for the Mangione family, now felt like a painful reminder of all they had lost. The house was quieter than it had ever been, the usual gatherings replaced by a sense of mourning that hung heavy in the air. Kathleen found herself retreating further into her thoughts, unsure of how to move forward or whether she even had the strength to do so. But amidst the pain and uncertainty, a resolve began to take shape within her. She knew that at some point, she would need to speak out, not just for Luigi, but for herself and the family as a whole. The world deserved to know the full story, not just the fragments that had been pieced together by outsiders. Kathleen was determined that when she finally broke her silence, it would be on her own terms. For now, though, she waited, gathering her thoughts and preparing for the moment when her voice would finally be heard. As the days crept toward the new year, Kathleen Mangione's resolve to remain silent began to waver. The weight of her emotions was matched only by the relentless pressure from the outside world. Every headline seemed designed to provoke, each article probing deeper into her family's history, dissecting every decision and interaction. Her husband, Louis, handled the onslaught with his usual pragmatism, advising patience and restraint. But Kathleen knew that patience alone wouldn't mend what had been broken. The world needed to hear her side, not to justify or excuse, but to provide a fuller picture of the son she still loved and the complexities that had shaped his tragic path. It was just days after Christmas when Kathleen decided it was time to speak. The family had gathered for what was meant to be a quiet evening, a chance to find solace in each other's company. But the unspoken tension in the room was palpable, an invisible thread pulling everyone further apart. Kathleen, seated in her usual chair by the fireplace, looked at her family, her husband, her daughters, the empty space where Luigi should have been, and felt the urge to act. Maria Santa, ever the compassionate voice in the family, was the first to notice the change in Kathleen's demeanor. She had been her mother's confidant through much of the ordeal, sharing private moments of grief and support. But now, she saw something new in Kathleen's eyes: determination. As the family talked in subdued tones, Kathleen finally spoke, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "It's time," she said simply. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a heavy blanket. That evening, Kathleen began drafting the statement that would soon make headlines. She worked late into the night, her pen moving across the paper with a purpose that felt both urgent and cathartic. Her words came not just from a place of pain, but also of love and clarity. She wrote about Luigi's childhood, the bright and curious boy he had once been, and the man he had become, brilliant but burdened by struggles that often felt insurmountable. She wrote about the family's attempts to reach him, to help him through his pain and anger, and the moments when those efforts had fallen short. Kathleen was careful not to dismiss the severity of Luigi's actions. She acknowledged the gravity of the crime, the loss of Brian Thompson, and the pain it had caused his family. But she also sought to humanize Luigi, to show the world that he was not a monster, but a deeply flawed individual shaped by circumstances both within and beyond his control. She spoke of his chronic pain, the surgery that had left him disillusioned, and the mental toll of feeling isolated in a world that often seemed indifferent to his suffering. Her words were not just for the public, they were for herself. Writing the statement allowed Kathleen to confront her own guilt and questions of accountability. Had she missed the warning signs? Could she have done more to prevent this tragedy? These were questions she knew she might never fully answer, but addressing them openly felt like a step toward healing. The statement was released to the press the following morning. Kathleen had chosen a small, respected publication to share her story, hoping to avoid the sensationalism that often accompanied larger outlets. The headline read, "A Mother's Heartbreak, Kathleen Mangione Speaks Out." The piece was accompanied by a photo of Kathleen and Luigi from years ago, a candid moment captured at a family gathering. They were smiling, their faces lit with the kind of joy that now felt like a distant memory. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the story was picked up by major news outlets, and Kathleen's words became the focal point of a renewed public discourse. Social media was ablaze with reactions, ranging from sympathy and support to harsh criticism. Some praised Kathleen for her courage, for standing by her son while acknowledging the harm he had caused. Others accused her of trying to deflect blame, of using her platform to garner sympathy for a man who had taken a life. For Kathleen, the mixed reactions were expected, though no less difficult to endure. What mattered most to her was that she had spoken her truth. She hoped that in doing so, she might help others understand the complexities of her family's journey, and perhaps even spark conversations about the societal issues that had played a role in Luigi's downfall. In the days that followed, Kathleen's statement became a lightning rod for discussions about mental health, privilege, and accountability. Advocacy groups seized the moment to highlight the challenges faced by individuals dealing with chronic pain and the lack of resources available to those in crisis. Others questioned the justice system's ability to address the root causes of crimes like Luigi's, arguing that harsher punishments did little to address the systemic issues at play. Amid the public discourse, Kathleen found herself reflecting on the unexpected ripple effects of her words. While she had hoped to provide insight into Luigi's struggles, she hadn't anticipated the broader impact her statement would have. She began receiving letters and emails from strangers, many of whom shared their own stories of loved ones battling similar challenges. Some wrote to thank her for shedding light on the human side of a case that had been reduced to headlines and sound bites. Others reached out to share their own pain, seeking solace in the knowledge that they were not alone. These interactions, while deeply moving, also added to Kathleen's sense of responsibility. She realized that her voice carried weight beyond her own family's story. If her words could spark change, even in small ways, she felt an obligation to use them wisely. At the same time, she was keenly aware of the fine line she walked, between advocating for understanding and risking the perception that she was minimizing Luigi's actions. Kathleen's decision to speak had also shifted the dynamics within the Mangione family. Her daughters, who had largely stayed out of the public eye, found themselves drawn into the conversation in new and unexpected ways. Maria Santa, in particular, became a more visible presence, using her platform as a physician to talk about the intersections of mental and physical health. She spoke candidly about the challenges her family had faced, always careful to center the narrative on the need for compassion and systemic reform. Louis, ever the pragmatist, remained focused on keeping the family grounded amid the turmoil. While he supported Kathleen's decision to speak, he often reminded her of the importance of preserving their privacy and maintaining balance. "The world will take what it wants from your words," he told her one evening, his tone both gentle and firm. "But we have to remember who we are, beyond all of this." Kathleen knew he was right, but she also knew there was no turning back. Her decision to speak had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and she was determined to walk through it with purpose. For now, she took solace in the small moments, the letters of gratitude from strangers, the quiet support of her family, and the knowledge that, in her own way, she was helping to shape a narrative that was far more complex than the headlines suggested. The world had heard Kathleen Mangione's voice, and while the echoes of her statement reverberated far and wide, the aftermath was far from simple. Her decision to speak had drawn a line in the sand, those who admired her bravery and those who questioned her intentions. For Kathleen, the days following her public statement were a whirlwind of emotions, obligations, and reflections. Every word she had spoken or written was now under scrutiny, dissected by pundits and analyzed in the court of public opinion. Yet, amidst the noise, Kathleen found a surprising sense of clarity. She had said what she needed to say, and no amount of critique could diminish that truth. The Mangione family's lives, however, remained in upheaval. Kathleen's statement had inadvertently reignited public interest in Luigi's case, and new waves of media attention descended upon them. For Louis, this meant doubling down on his efforts to protect what little privacy they had left. He instructed the staff at their properties to refuse interviews and reinforce security measures around the estate. The family had always been cautious about shielding their personal lives from the public eye, but this new level of scrutiny felt unrelenting. Kathleen, meanwhile, found herself navigating uncharted waters. The responses to her statement, both supportive and critical, brought unexpected opportunities and challenges. Advocacy groups reached out, inviting her to participate in discussions about mental health reform and systemic failures within healthcare. At first, she was hesitant. Speaking out about Luigi had been deeply personal, but these invitations required her to enter a broader, more public arena. After much deliberation, Kathleen decided to accept a few select invitations. If her words could contribute to meaningful change, she felt it was a responsibility she couldn't ignore. One of her first appearances was at a panel discussion hosted by a prominent mental health advocacy group. The event, titled "Breaking the Silence: Families and Mental Health," brought together parents, professionals, and activists to share their experiences and insights. Kathleen's inclusion as a panelist sparked considerable debate. Some applauded her involvement, while others questioned whether her family's privilege disqualified her from speaking on issues faced by those with fewer resources. On stage, Kathleen spoke with a quiet intensity that captivated the audience. She described the challenges of supporting a loved one grappling with chronic pain and mental health struggles, emphasizing the importance of early intervention and accessible resources. "My son's story is not an excuse," she said, her voice steady. "But it is a reminder of how easily someone can fall through the cracks, even when they seem to have every advantage. We owe it to ourselves and to our communities to do better." Her words were met with a standing ovation, though she knew that not everyone in the room agreed with her. For Kathleen, the event was both validating and humbling. It was one thing to speak from personal experience. It was another to recognize the broader implications of her family's tragedy. As she left the event, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing your story," the woman said. "I lost my brother last year, and hearing you talk about Luigi made me feel less alone." Moments like these gave Kathleen a renewed sense of purpose. But they also came with their own emotional weight. Each conversation, each story shared by a stranger, was a reminder of the universal pain that accompanied loss and struggle. Kathleen often found herself wondering how many lives might have been saved if the systems in place had been more effective, more compassionate. These thoughts kept her awake at night, fueling her growing commitment to advocacy while deepening her personal grief. While Kathleen's efforts garnered widespread attention, they also brought new challenges to the Mangione family dynamic. Maria Santa, who had long been a vocal advocate for empathy and reform, found herself stepping into a more prominent role. Her experience as a physician lent credibility to the family's advocacy work, and her calm demeanor made her a natural spokesperson. She began speaking at events alongside her mother, offering a clinical perspective that complemented Kathleen's personal narrative. Yet, as the two women worked together, tensions occasionally surfaced. Kathleen's maternal instincts often clashed with Maria Santa's professional approach, leading to moments of quiet disagreement. During one planning session for an upcoming event, Kathleen expressed hesitation about discussing Luigi's manifesto in detail. "I don't want people to think we're justifying what he did," she said, her tone firm but uncertain. Maria Santa, ever pragmatic, replied gently but firmly, "Mom, we're not justifying anything. But if we don't address the manifesto, someone else will, and they might not handle it with the same care we do." These discussions, though difficult, ultimately strengthened their bond. Both women understood the delicate balance they needed to strike, honoring Luigi's humanity without excusing his actions and advocating for systemic change without overshadowing the pain of Brian Thompson's family. It was a tightrope walk, but one they were determined to navigate together. Lewis, on the other hand, took a more reserved approach. While he supported his wife and daughter's efforts, he remained focused on the practicalities of keeping the family stable. He continued to manage Lorien Health Services with his usual diligence, though the business itself faced challenges in the wake of the scandal. Some clients expressed concerns about the Mangione name, questioning whether the family's reputation could withstand such public scrutiny. Lewis, ever the steady hand, reassured them with calm professionalism. "Our work speaks for itself," he told one concerned client. "This is a family matter, but it doesn't change the care we provide." Despite his outward composure, Louis carried his own private burden. He rarely spoke about Luigi, even within the family, choosing instead to focus on the present. But Kathleen knew her husband well enough to see the cracks in his armor. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside felt far away, he would sit by the window, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Kathleen often joined him, neither of them speaking, both finding solace in the shared silence. As the months passed, the family began to find a semblance of balance, though their lives were forever changed. Kathleen continued her advocacy work, though she carefully limited her public appearances to avoid overexposure. Maria Santa became a trusted voice in discussions about mental health and systemic reform, while Louis focused on rebuilding trust within the community. Together, they navigated the complexities of their new reality, each drawing strength from the others. For Kathleen, the journey was far from over. She knew that her family's story was now part of a larger narrative, one that extended beyond the walls of their home. But she also knew that their bond, tested as it had been, remained unbroken. And in that, she found hope, not just for her family, but for the countless others whose lives had been touched by similar struggles. As spring began to thaw the cold grip of winter, the Mangione family found themselves settling into a new rhythm of life. Though the public's fascination with their story had lessened somewhat, its impact remained deeply woven into their daily existence. Kathleen had become a quiet force in the advocacy world, speaking sparingly but with conviction when opportunities arose. Her words, always measured and heartfelt, had made her a respected voice in conversations about mental health and systemic reform. Yet for all her efforts, she remained acutely aware of the shadows that lingered over her family. The trial, which had loomed for months, was now entering its final stages. Luigi's legal team had presented a defense centered on his chronic pain, mental health struggles, and the profound disillusionment that had shaped his manifesto. They argued that these factors, while not excusing his actions, painted a more nuanced picture of a man pushed to the brink. The prosecution, however, painted Luigi as a calculating individual, someone who had carefully planned his actions as a twisted form of protest against the system he despised. Each day in court was a new trial for Kathleen. Sitting in the gallery, flanked by Louis and Maria Santa, She listened as lawyers dissected every detail of Luigi's life, from his upbringing to his final social media posts before the incident. The evidence was laid bare for the world to see, each detail a fresh wound for the family to endure. Kathleen struggled to reconcile the image of the man described in court with the son she had raised. It was a duality that she knew would never fully resolve. The verdict, when it came, felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Luigi was found guilty on charges of first-degree murder, a decision that carried with it the weight of a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Kathleen's breath caught as the words were read aloud in the courtroom, their finality sinking into her like a stone. She glanced at Luigi, who sat stoically at the defendant's table, his face betraying no emotion. It was a moment that felt suspended in time, a blend of heartbreak, resignation, and a faint glimmer of relief that the waiting was over. As the family left the courthouse that day, they were met by a wall of cameras and reporters, their questions sharp and unrelenting. Kathleen said nothing, her hand resting lightly on Louis's arm as they navigated the chaos. It wasn't until they were safely home, the doors shut tightly against the outside world, that Kathleen allowed herself to exhale. The trial was over, but the journey of reckoning and healing was far from complete. In the weeks that followed, Kathleen turned her focus inward, seeking ways to rebuild her sense of self and purpose. She continued her advocacy work, but with a more deliberate pace, ensuring she had the time and space to process her emotions. She also began visiting Luigi in prison, a decision that was met with mixed reactions from those around her. Some questioned why she would maintain contact with him, while others admired her commitment to supporting her son despite everything. The visits were bittersweet, filled with moments of clarity and pain. Luigi, though reserved, seemed to take solace in their conversations. He spoke candidly about his struggles, his regrets, and the ways he was attempting to make sense of his new reality. For Kathleen, these visits were a lifeline, a reminder that despite his actions, Luigi was still her son. Their bond, though strained, was unbroken. Maria Santa joined her mother on a few of these visits, their shared presence a source of quiet strength for both women. While the conversations with Luigi were often heavy, they also carried glimpses of the man they had known before his descent into isolation and anger. These moments, however fleeting, offered a sense of hope that even in the darkest of places, light could still find its way through. Louis, ever pragmatic, focused on ensuring the family's stability in the wake of the trial. He redoubled his efforts at Lorien Health Services, determined to rebuild the trust and reputation that had been shaken by the events of the past year. While he rarely spoke about Luigi, his actions spoke volumes about his commitment to preserving the family's legacy and providing a foundation for their future. As time passed, the Mangiones began to find a sense of equilibrium, though their lives were forever changed. Kathleen's advocacy work continued to resonate, drawing attention to the need for systemic reforms and greater compassion for those struggling with mental health and chronic pain. She became a mentor to other families navigating similar challenges, offering support and guidance to those who felt lost in the face of overwhelming circumstances. The public, too, began to shift its focus, the intensity of interest in the Mangione family gradually fading as new stories captured the nation's attention. Yet, the impact of their journey lingered in the hearts and minds of those who had followed it closely. For many, Kathleen's voice had become a beacon of resilience and empathy, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable pain, it was possible to find purpose and connection. For Kathleen, the path forward was not one of forgetting, but of remembering. Remembering the boy Luigi had been, the man he had become, and the lessons learned along the way. She knew that their story, as painful as it was, carried the potential to inspire change and foster understanding. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, she was determined to walk it with the same quiet strength that had carried her through the darkest moments of her life. As spring gave way to summer, the Mangiones gathered for a small family dinner, their first in months that felt truly celebratory. The air was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, a stark contrast to the heavy silences that had once defined their evenings. Kathleen looked around the table, her gaze resting on each member of her family, and felt a flicker of hope. They were not the same as they had been before, but they were still here, together, finding their way forward. In the quiet moments that followed, Kathleen stepped outside and gazed at the stars. their light steady and enduring against the night sky. She thought of Luigi, of the man he was, and the man he might still become. And in that moment, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of redemption, not just for Luigi, but for all of them. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.